There were a lot of questions that came up this morning in Revelation study, so I'm going to go over each of those questions in videos. I think this might be the last one. The question what had to do with Revelation 20, verse 13, when the books are open and the dead are being judged. In verse 13, it says, "The sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them, and each person was judged according to what they had done." Now, one thing that I think that we need to remember is that by this time, the second resurrection has already taken place. So we don't really know much about the second resurrection. I'm going to tell you literally the one paragraph that tells us about it. "When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog," which means it's this deceptive mountain. And Magog is the land of that deceptive mountain, or power, "and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. But fire came down from heaven and devoured them, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever." Literally nothing is really told to us about what's going to happen during that time, except that Satan's going to be unbound and released from prison to go out and deceive again. But we don't know what life is going to be like for the people who are going to come to life and be given this chance to be saved only as one escaping the flames. We don't know anything. We just know that ultimately the wicked are going to surround the camp of God's people, the city he loves, again. But this time fire is going to come down from heaven and it's going to devour them. And actually, we're told that the earth is going to be destroyed by fire. So what we do know from Revelation is that the sea or waters are defined as peoples, languages, multitudes, and nations. And we see that with the waters where the prostitute sits. We also see it with the sea of glass that's seen in the throne room, which is the multitude in white robes who are saved. So there's nothing good about it or bad about it. It just means peoples, multitudes, languages, and nations. The thing that comes up for me about this is the second angel that sounds his trumpet. "Something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood. A third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed." Then, with the third angel sounding its trumpet, "a great star blazing like a torch fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter." So I'm wondering if this is what that's talking about. It would seem that it is, since it's being referenced within the context of the book of Revelation, that people have died within those waters or sea, peoples, languages, multitudes, and nations. Now, if you've never read Revelation 8 and seen and studied the symbolism that exists in these different trumpets, then you're going to take this to be very literal. But it's very clear in Revelation that it's not literal. I mean, literally throughout Revelation, you're being told that stars are angels and lampstands are the churches and the sea or the waters are peoples, languages, multitudes, and nations. So no one should take Revelation literally. And if they do, it's just because they're carnal. It's not because they're actually paying attention to what the book is saying. So now what does this mean? Don't people come out of Hades? Don't they come out of rest? Don't they come out of... why would this passage be referring to them coming out of the sea? The answer is, I don't really know. What I believe, what I sense from this passage of scripture is that it's really just talking about where people are coming out of in order to be judged. Those who die before the fifth trumpet blows did not receive the mark of the beast. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they were thrown into the lake of burning sulfur. But I think more importantly, and this is the reason why I say we don't know what's going to happen at the time of the second resurrection, or is there something similar to what we're seeing here in these other two trumpets where they're dying in the sea, and therefore they're dying before they would have had an opportunity otherwise to be part of the bride of Christ. So is there something similar that ends up happening in The second resurrection, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that it would make sense to base this on what's happening at these other times, because, and I hope everyone is following me here, and if you're not, then feel free to ask questions. But by this time that the second resurrection happens, everything that has happened previously and wherever people have been thrown, symbolically, is not really going to matter, because if they're coming from Hades, for example, or they've been resting and now they're rising in the first resurrection, those who rise in the first resurrection are either going to stay here or they're going up in the first resurrection as the bride of Christ. If you stay here, you're going to be thrown in the same place anyway. It's not like you're not slain by the sword and then thrown into it. There's no indication that you're thrown into these different places. So as I understand it, if by the time the judgment happens, which is after that second resurrection period, there has to be some sort of symbolism that God has used during that second resurrection period, in which people have died within the sea, the peoples, languages, multitudes, and nations. So that by the time of that judgment period, that's where they're coming out of. Some in the sea, some in Hades. I think those were the only two options, actually. So that was the question. What does it mean that the sea gave up the dead in them? I don't think we're going to know until the second resurrection, because there's no other information in the Bible that tells us about that period of time and where people are thrown. Like I said, if you have more questions about this, please ask. And James, you were the one who asked this question, so if you will let me know if I sufficiently answered your question, I'd really appreciate it. Please discern this message with God.